Hello, wonderful people. We are now on chapter 8. And chapter 8 is like a foundation chapter for the rest of the semester. So it's a really crucial chapter. Too many of the subsequent concepts are going to be anchored in this chapter. This chapter is about classical economists versus Keynesians. We're looking at classical as in timeless. It does not mean dated or old. Kind of think like a classic car, classic watch. It was cool and hip 50 years ago. It will be cool and hip in another 100 years. And that's what makes it classic. Now, there are pretty much 12 classical economists that we will make a little bit of reference to, most notably Adam Smith, and maybe I'll bring this up in a bit again. Keynesians, this is based on John Maynard Keynes right here. Keynesians are people who believe in John Maynard Keynes's teachings. So we're looking at a comparison between the two for this chapter, and it will become quite clear as we move on. And obviously we are looking at a giant here that we are dealing with, and sometimes it's a sleeping giant and sometimes not so much. And this is all part of our discussion. So let's go to the classical beliefs. First thing I want to share with you is that there is the egg and chicken argument in economics, the egg and the chicken being supply and demand. As you know, if you say, well, the egg came first, somebody's going to say, well, who laid the egg? And if you say, well, yeah, you're right. Okay, so the chicken came first, somebody's going to say, well, doesn't a chicken come from an egg? Now, just so you know, microbiology has settled this point, and the chicken came first because, just so you know, because evolution happens when an organism is whole. So if you're interested, you can pursue it a little bit more. But for us in economics, unfortunately, we don't have microbiology, and microeconomics still hasn't been able to answer that question. Which one comes first? It's a matter of opinion. Do you believe that there wouldn't be demand without supply, or do you believe there wouldn't be supply without demand? I can tell you right off the bat, I am a demand-sider type of economist. So if I toot that horn a little bit, that could be a little bit of bias on my own, that I have. But by all means, you're here to use your own intellect. You're here to analyze for yourselves. Stick to the facts. We don't invent facts. There's no such thing as alternative facts. But sometimes the interpretation of what something can mean can be tweaked. And in this case, you have to use your own judgment as well sometimes when you are deciding what actually makes more sense. I will tell you right off the bat, they both make sense. And sometimes one might be more applicable than the other. But to me and to many other people, it seems like the buyer is the ultimate, and without the buyer, there's just not going to be any selling. And this is just a position that I take. Now let's look at classical beliefs. There are three main beliefs that they have. Supply creates its own demand is the first belief. Competition keeps prices, interest rates, and wages at equilibrium. And the third belief is in a laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is French for, literally it means to let it do. But as you know, when you translate, it doesn't make sense to translate literally. So it's like saying let it be. Who is the it? The economy. And who are we saying hands off the economy to? The government. So let's start at the beginning. Supply creates its own demand. If you build it, they will come. We've all seen the movie, right? Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. The idea is if businesses come to an area, it starts with them. They create jobs. If the jobs are available, there's more income. That income that is being generated will be re-spent, and hopefully locally and not, with like national companies or international companies, and hopefully that will keep it a little bit more contained locally. So if you have enough supply in an economy, then you will end up with enough demand. Why? Because the seller, as in the manufacturer, as in the employer or producer, is the aspect of an economy that is doing the job creation. Job creation is going to come either from the government or from the private sector, as in sellers. Remember, sellers and producers and manufacturers, this is like all the same language. This is the first belief. Now, obviously, we're going to be criticizing these beliefs when we start talking about Keynes and his point of view. But this is the first belief. If you build it, they will come. Start applying to your region. So if you live in Phoenix, start thinking, is this true for Phoenix? If you live, in anywhere, if you live in Western Massachusetts, and most likely you do, or in Northern Connecticut or Southern Vermont, start asking yourself those questions. Is it true that all we need is for businesses to come into town and that will make everything happen, as in more employment and more jobs and more income? And that makes sense, but you have to ask yourself, what would bring them there in the first place? 2, notice the language. I always emphasize the language. Slow down and look at the language. Competition. What is the key here is competition, which means the number of sellers. I'm going to bring you full circle to these things when we start working with your exercises for this chapter and I receive them. You will see what I mean. Competition is the key. It keeps prices, interest rates, and wages at equilibrium. Now, one of the questions I ask you on your exercises is how come they're all lumped together? They're all lumped together because they are all prices. When we say prices, we mean the prices of goods and services. When we say interest rates, interest rate is the price of borrowing. What is an interest rate? You ask the bank for a loan, the loan says, sure, but you have to pay for this loan. It's called an interest rate. So it's the price of borrowing. And what are wages? Well, wages are the price of labor. The reason an employer pays us a salary is because we are committing a certain amount of time and effort and talents and resources and skills, right, for that employer, into that what do we call it, workday, or the 40-hour week, into that period. I guess what is what I was looking for, the phase that we end up giving to that individual or that company who is paying us. So they're all prices of goods and services, prices of borrowing, prices of labor. Therefore, they can all be lumped together. And the idea here is so long there's enough competition in an economy, those prices are going to be at equilibrium. And because they are at equilibrium, and if you remember from chapter 3, that is the happy place to be for the market, that intersection of demand and supply, then the government does not need to step in and do anything about it whatsoever. Therefore, the government, should the economy, laisser faire, let it do what it needs to do without them intervening or doing anything about that. So one image I want to leave you with before we continue is the image of baking. Now, you may or may not know about baking. I enjoy baking. I usually bake for other people, but I do enjoy baking. I do it sometimes, and I will tell you this. If you're making pastry, you touch it as little as possible. You really ruin pastry if you over manipulate it. You kind of want to mix that very cold butter as quickly as you can without over kneading so you can get that flaky pastry. If you're baking bread, it's quite the opposite. Frankly, if you're having a bad day, hey, bake some bread. Make some sourdough bread if you're going to eat bread, right? And what you will find is you have to knead it and punch it and roll it, and you're rough with it. So to classical economists, the economy is pastry, and the government is the baker, because the government is the facilitator. Therefore, the government should handle the economy as little as possible. That is not what a Keynesian is going to think. Now, together with the classical beliefs comes Say's law. Say's law comes from Jean-Baptiste Say, because it kind of seems weird, right, to say Say's law says. It's from a French economist, again, Jean-Baptiste Say. He came up with this law that basically tells you something not shocking at all, that the quantity demanded in an economy or in a market, and he specifically focuses on a market, and an economy is made up of many markets, equals the quantity supplied most of the time. Probably all the time, according to Say, but I'm going to say most of the time to kind of keep things simple. In other words, there are no prolonged shortages or surpluses. The market is going to be, let's make it, markets are at equilibrium pretty much as a typical state. Now, when Jean-Baptiste was writing this one, he was living at a time where economies were all barter. And what is a barter economy? I exchange one good or service for, like, for instance, if I want you to fix my roof, I may negotiate with you, if I'm a baker, speaking of baking, X number loaves of bread over X number of days, and you fix my roof, right? This is an exchange that we're going to have. if this is the case and I'm a baker, how would I determine how much to bake? How much I would bake as many loaves as I can eat, and as many loaves I have already pre-agreed to trade with people. If I make a little bit extra, it's very minimal because I don't want to waste my energy. I don't want to waste my resources, right? Therefore, what we end up with is a quantity demanded that equals quantity supplied. And it's coming from quantity supplied. I'm doing the trading, I'm doing the bartering, I am deciding how many loaves of bread, and I'm only baking according to the amount I'm going to trade. That keeps the market at equilibrium. See where it says here it's applicable only in the barter economy, right here? It is not applicable in a money economy. The reason it is not applicable in a money economy is because when you have money, you can have excess. I can't save cabbages and bread for tomorrow, but I can money. And if you can put money aside, then you can create with it excess commodities as well. Now, before I let you go for this video, here are some notable contributors. Here are some people that we look at when we talk about classical economics. And Adam Smith is obviously the founder, the father of classical economics, all economics, because first it was classic before it became modern. David Ricardo, a lot of the, theories you learn about trade have to do with him. Thomas Malthus, and Robert Jacques Turdeau. There's John Stuart Mill, there's Jean-Baptiste, there's Eugene von Wamberg. So you're looking at several people, and there are more, but generally 12 predominant ones that make up classical economics. Okay, I'm going to stop this video right here and begin video number 2.